Well, it's also, though, it is a broader pattern. Everybody that's from a state that was a big lockdown state, New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and California, is facing political blowback, whereas politicians and governors who decided not to follow lockdown laws for the most part, such as in Florida and Texas, are experiencing record approval ratings. So I think that this may continue to blow back, and especially in light of new information that, apparently Biden was originally trying not to do an investigation into the origin of COVID-19. And that was also a hush-hush from several weeks, maybe a month or so ago, that was about where this COVID-19 came from. And you can go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com and watch that hush-hush along with some others if you want. But basically, Biden's been forced to re-examine his desire to shut down that inquiry. And if I was Fauci, I'd be looking at vacation plans in Brazil right about now. Not that he's likely to face consequences, but public consequences are probably coming.
And there's been some highlights of clips of Fauci saying things 8 years ago, 4 years ago. I was on Eric Hunley's channel with Nate Brody on Friday. Eric Hunley is also on Locals, unstructured.locals.com. And we were talking about it, and Eric put up an article from 2017, which said Trump is likely going to face a pandemic in his presidency. Not scripted, might be the better word, authored by Fauci. And so, we're all like hypothesizing. Nate says, look, every president has faced a pandemic. Obama did, Trump did. They happen pretty much with every presidency. To which I said, well, if it happens with every presidency, it's kind of an ominous thing to remind then, because if it happens all the time, it's, it's not newsworthy. But the fact that it's Fauci saying it comes off a little weird and suspicious, and certainly can lend to some creative thoughts. But now, what's the bigger deal? There's the bigger issue. In fact, Robert, maybe enlighten everybody as to what the big deal was. Who was cross-examining Fauci? Rand Paul. So he was asking Fauci about financing of this Wuhan lab. Can you explain to everybody what the significance of that cross was, so that we can actually put this all together now?
Sure. So essentially it's called gain of function research. So it's in my view disguised as biosafety. People can look up Francis Boyle. He was one of the key lawyers. He's a law professor at the University of Illinois who's raised a lot of questions about so-called biosafety labs, because essentially biological weapons we're supposed to mostly be getting rid of and not doing anymore. Nixon helped get rid of them back in the early 70s. And there's various treaties that impacted U.S. domestic laws that do it. So they don't call them bioweapons anymore. They call them biosafety. The problem is gain of function is when you take a virus that's natural to the world and you add a function to make it either more deadly or more able to contaminate people. From the get-go, there were people saying that they believed, including Francis Boyle, that COVID-19 had the hallmarks of a bioweapon, not something naturally produced. Brett Weinstein was raising issues with this very early on, saying that this is a theory that should be explored and so forth. Also, great guy, Dark Horse podcast on YouTube and elsewhere. And so given that context, the question was whether that could have happened. The issue is this became controversial. It's sporadically controversial because most Americans are clueless about it. They don't know that we still develop bioweapons. We just call them biosafety. The theory is this: I'm designing this gain of function to see because I think somebody else might design it. And so I'm going to design it first, then design the vaccine for it so that we can't be impacted by it. The critics would say, no, this is just developing bioweapons. And maybe you want a vaccine for your own population, but not for the other population that you're going to use it against. The issue with Fauci is that this became controversial during Obama's tenure in 2014 because some of this research was being done at some U.S. facilities. It was shut down, and it appears that Fauci at the National Institutes for Health continued to fund it indirectly by funding it in Wuhan instead, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's one of the only what's called BS level 4. I love it. It's called BS. But
it's BS level 4, all right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, biosafety level 4. So it's one of the highest levels in the world of what kind of experimental research you can do. They were researching coronaviruses in particular, doing gain of function research there. And that's why from a very early stage, there were some people who immediately were raising questions about what's the likely coincidence of one of the only bioweapons labs in the world being within the same city within miles of where this virus emerged when it concerns the same kind of coronaviruses that they've been experimenting with. And so China did a good job of shutting it down. Then the media helped and big tech helped. Until this week, we probably couldn't even go into this detail here on YouTube because this was it would have been shut down. But because they're now being so embarrassed by so many people around the world recognizing that this is the more likely than not just a viable theory, but a more likely than not theory of its origin, even YouTube and Facebook this week had to backtrack and from its prior, and they've done this many times. I mean, initially, the WHO said this wasn't even a contaminate; it can't go between human to human transmission. At the behest of the Chinese, January 14th, people can look it up themselves. But so that's the backstory, and the implication for Fauci is what exactly he knew, whether he was skirting U.S. law, because in his initial answers to Senator Paul, he was very. Many people saw it as very misleading. And that would set him up for potential federal criminal prosecution for lying to Congress. For much less consequential supposed misrepresentations, they tried to put Roger Stone in prison for 8 years. So let's see if they're willing to put Fauci under inquiry. I doubt they'll put him under legal inquiry, but it might be time for Fauci to look at early retirement, and not a bad time to look at places that don't have extradition to the U.S., just to be sure.
And I have to make sure that I can bring up a proper chat, not an accidental one. But yeah, suddenly misinformation about COVID is becoming fact. I feel more comfortable talking about it now that it's come out of Joe Biden's mouth, the president of the United States. Had it been, I don't like playing that game, but had it been Trump, you know what everyone would be saying: censor it, shut it down. Joe Biden.
That's their excuse. The media's excuse for why they got it wrong was they hated Trump. There was that Trump. You can't trust Trump, and he was talking about this. It always goes back to Orange Man bad.
And imagine, when we talk about censorship and why censorship is bad, even when the ideas are objectively bad, how much could this have potentially exacerbated the problem, hampered the response, hampered the crowdsourcing of knowledge and information to, respond more properly? Had this not been censored from the get-go, you'll never know. It'll always be hypothetical, but it is not hypothetical to say that it would have been better off to have had these discussions a year ago, as opposed to having big tech playing our medical government information overlords as they did. And now a year later, 500,000 people in the States, 600,000 in the States, 22,000 in Canada, whatever in the world. Now we can start having this discussion now that all the damage is done and there's nothing, now that this information could be useful for other things, potentially justifying military or sanctions and others. It can be useful for that politically, but not for any response purposes.
We'll also look at how the political fallout could have been radically different. For Trump, who's anti-China, to say that this was a biological weapon released by the Chinese deliberately or accidentally to harm the U.S. Economy and society would have totally shifted the political narrative. That's the real reason why the media couldn't touch it and allow it to be discussed, in my view.
It becomes increasingly difficult, Robert, to not get black pill jaded, but I don't know what the white pill is. The good one, right? It's like the knowledge plus.
The white pill is the good one. Black pill is doom and gloom.
Okay.
the red pill is the Matrix awakening.
And by the way, everybody, I think we're at like 1,500 people watching live on Rumble. Rumble, we're also live. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. We're live on Rumble. Rumble has chat now, although I think you have to have an account to chat, and people don't like having to give their number to have an account. Totally understand. No system is perfect, and there's always going to be something to complain about, but. All right. Okay. So that's the Fauci and Iran thing, which it's fascinating. And then he said there was a clip that's, surfaced from 2012 about Fauci talking about how to make it more aerosol dispersant or something along those lines. I forget exactly what the clip was, but a lot of stuff that's coming out now, and you start connecting the dots, not in terms of creating some grand deliberate conspiracy, but rather some overt bad decisions, and then the political cover-ups to cover up those bad decisions, bad policies, and just misinformation. Because right now, the one thing that's abundantly clear, it is mainstream media and the big tech that are guilty of the misinformation in a material sense. But what's going to happen? Probably nothing.